Salut YouTube and welcome back to the Not Even French channel. So today I want to dive into some of the best parts of Paris that aren't even portrayed properly in films and TV series, because I feel like every film, TV series, depiction of Paris, message being sent to the outside world is always kind of the same, you know, like you've got the person in the apartment, like everyone's in a small apartment that looks out onto the Eiffel Tower, and they spend their time taking like coffee in the cafes and accidentally standing in dog poo on their way there, and everyone's ridiculously good looking and like seemingly don't have jobs and all of this kind of stuff. Like there's definitely an image of Paris, this romantic, perfect, clean city that gets sent out into the world. And there's actually a name for the syndrome. It's called Paris syndrome, which is the only city with a syndrome like this, which is the shock that tourists feel when they realize and they come to Paris for the very first time that it's a big modern city with all of the things that go with big modern cities. And it's not necessarily this fantasy land that's been depicted. So on one side you've got that, but then on the other side, I think there's so many cool things about Paris that they just don't portray and they just don't talk about enough. So today I'm going to jam on that a little bit. And by the way, if you haven't seen my Emily in Paris video, I definitely recommend checking that out because I did a review of season 1 of Emily in Paris. And this is one of the typical things that, again, it focuses on all of these sort of superficial cliche areas of Paris, but doesn't necessarily give a nice indication of life in the city and all of the other good things that there are, other than, you know, beautiful monuments, beautiful people, and the occasional stepping in dog shit. So let's jump into some of my favorite things about the city that I called home for 6 years. But just before I do, if you want to watch more French TV and French Netflix and more French films and that kind of stuff, I definitely recommend getting a VPN. And today's video is brought to you by my VPN service provider, NordVPN, which is a super cool way to be able to access sites like Canal Plus and French Netflix. I also use it for UK TV as well, because what it does is it actually makes your computer think that you are based in that country, and so it allows you to access their TV and online streaming services just like a local. So you've probably heard of NordVPN already because they're basically recommended by everyone everywhere, but in case you haven't heard of them before, essentially what makes them so popular is that they've got super fast servers. So they have over 5,200 in over 59 different countries. There's no data logging whatsoever, and they protect your private data when you're in public spaces connected to public Wi-Fi's like cafes and airports and that kind of thing. And you can have up to 6 connections running simultaneously as well. So I've teamed up with the guys at NordVPN to bring you a special cyber gift. So if you click the link down below, you will get a very special deal for the 2-year plan. When you click on the link, you will see this page appear with a super awesome deal. Here we've got a Black Friday special, which is you can buy the 2-year deal with NordVPN at 68% off and get 4 extra months for free with a 30-day money back guarantee as well. So you can use the code NOTEVENFRENCH at checkout and get a pretty sweet deal if you want to be streaming those French TVs and series, or from anywhere in the world actually. All right, so let's dive into the non-cliche elements of Paris that just aren't represented enough in TV and film. The first are my lazy Sundays. I miss those Sundays. So in Paris and France in general, but in Paris as well, shops are often closed on Sundays. So you may have some museums open, you may have a few cafes open, but generally the city shuts down except for like very specific commercial zones or malls that have a special permit, and you live the slow life. I think that a lot of TVs and films often show Paris, you know, you're often shopping, it's busy and crowded and that kind of thing, and it can be, but you can also have very lazy, chill Sundays, living the slow life, doing lots of walking and exploring, and it's like the city just goes quiet. I don't think those are presented in media enough. The second point is that Paris is actually really diverse. And I talked about this in my Emily in Paris review, that it was so whitewashed. They found like 1 token black colleague and 1 Asian friend, and the rest of the people and everyone that you saw was white. And Paris is actually full of diversity. It's very multicultural, and it can be really cool as a foreigner arriving in the city and finding your people. There are all sorts of Facebook groups for, you know, different nationalities, ethnicities, living in Paris. For me, it meant catching up with fellow New Zealanders who were living in the city, but I know that everyone can find their crowd, and there is quite a big international scene there. There are loads of international students, but lots of expats living there as well. You also have the African influence on France as well, due to their shared history together. And what this means is that you can find, for example, delicious Senegalese restaurants, for example, in Le Marais, and things that you just don't really think about when you see this sort of whitewashed version of Paris that's sort of depicted in the media. So while of course we have in mind going to France for the French culture or the French food, just know that it's a lot richer and more diverse, and there's loads of different things to be discovered in that city. The next thing I don't see enough about Paris when it comes to series, TV and film are the markets. There are killer markets in Paris. There's the famous flea markets, so les marchés aux puces, and there are incredible ones all around the place, but I guess one of the most famous ones is in the suburb Saint-Ouen. And you also have loads of vintage markets as well, brocante. And if you're prepared to rummage through, you can find some gold in there. Can you imagine vintage markets in Paris? I don't know why these aren't shown more often, because they are one of the coolest things to do on a weekend in Paris. The next thing that I just don't think gets enough credit and isn't shown enough is the famous apéro and les planches. So there's this beautiful concept in France, which is the apéro. It's like the nibbles and the drinks you have before dinner. This is quite, you know, universal, okay. But the way they do it in Paris specifically is with planche. And on the planche, you have delicious cheese and charcuterie, and it's just the classic thing that if you go out, you're gonna get this planche and have like fresh baguette with the cheese and the charcuterie, and it's such a pleasure and such a joy. And I think the apéro needs to be shown off much more often internationally, because this should become a thing all over. Although in saying that, it's pretty hard to replicate that French bread and cheese and charcuterie. It is something that is particularly enjoyable when in France, given. What I love about planche is that they're simple. You often see Paris being portrayed as this, you know, fine dining, food snob culture, and there is that element there. But I mean, in general, give a Frenchie a planche and they are super happy. Another thing that I think isn't shown as much as it could be is the picnic culture in Paris. So in Paris, as the weather gets warmer, there's a big culture around having a picnic with friends and also playing a game called Molki, which I hadn't heard before, but it's essentially you have like these wooden battens with numbers on them, and you have a key, I guess, and you're throwing it and trying to hit the battens with numbers on them down until you reach a certain number of points. So this is a really big game, and the hours that we would spend, and Parisians spend, in parks, sunbathing, picnicking, and playing Molki. I just don't know if that's a part of the culture that gets sort of celebrated enough or talked about enough. And that would be a classic Sunday afternoon, Saturday afternoon pastime for loads of groups of Parisian friends. If you do like your picnics a little bit posh, there is the famous dîner en blanc as well, where everyone wears white, and it's incredible. Another thing I think they don't show enough is all of the eclectic and weird shops and museums that you can find in Paris. I mean, the focus is always on the Louvre. If you're ever at a museum in Paris, in a film or a TV series, you're at the Louvre, or maybe at Musée d'Orsay. But there are so many incredible finds in Paris on this front. Of course, there's so many finds in terms of arts and culture anyway. But there are some kooky museums in Paris. One museum that was just up the road from me when I was living in the 9th arrondissement was the Eroticism Museum, so Le Musée de l'Erotisme. So in this museum you would find things like clips from the very first pornos and sex toys that date centuries going back into ancient civilizations and things like that. It's pretty kooky. So next time you're thinking about going to Paris, once all of this pandemic stuff is over, definitely try and check out the alternative museum scene. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. The next thing I think is that they portray like Paris rooftops as a very elite thing and a thing that only specific kinds of people can access. But rooftops with beautiful views of the Eiffel Tower are absolutely in abundance for the average Joe. You can go to so many bars, any old person, me as a student, like grabbing a drink on this terrace with lots of other students and other chilled kind of like professionals or whoever, whatever, anyone can do it. And you're just looking out at the most incredible views of the city. My favorite bar to do this was Le Perchoir because that had like a really cool, nice hipster vibe and like nice chips and hamburgers as well. And you just take a drink and just look at the most incredible views. And I want you to know that this kind of stuff, it's not elitist, it's accessible. Like this is part of being able to have a drink in Paris, is to have views like that. Another thing about Paris that never gets shown, and I can't believe I haven't spoken about this yet actually in one of my culture shocks videos or anything, but it's the outdoor gyms. There's this thing in Paris about these like outdoor gyms that are, you know, stuck in the ground, and you can use them to exercise and do resistant and weights kind of work on them. And yeah, it's the strangest thing. You just, especially when the city's empty, you just see what looks like these like abandoned gyms in the most, some of them in the most iconic places. Like when we lived in the 15th arrondissement, there was this little island under Pont de Grenelle, and there was this fixed outdoor gym there, and they never show these for some reason, but I think they're quite unique. Like I haven't actually seen them, I don't think, in other cities. Maybe, like I wasn't paying attention, but this is crazy. Like I've never seen this before. It's certainly not something that exists in New Zealand, that's for sure. And speaking of exercise, something that I found really cool when I moved over to Paris was the bike sharing system. So just being able to hire bikes, Vélib they were called, and take them from one sort of station to the next. I would go to work every day using my bike hire bike. I thought that was super cool, and I know that they're quite common in a lot of European cities, but it's just interesting because I know that a lot of films and TV shows sort of show everyone getting around in Ubers or taxis, and I do think actually most people get around by these bike sharing and scooter sharing services, and they hop on those to zip around the city rather than actually paying for an Uber or taxi every single time. Something that you hardly ever see in films or TV series about Paris is the beach. Did you even know that Paris has a kind of beach? The Paris plage? It's this beach that just pops up once a year. And maybe in COVID times it wasn't so popular, but hopefully once we get over this wave of life and COVID, the Paris plage will come back in full force because there are beach chairs, there are umbrellas, you can play in the sand. I mean, you wouldn't want to swim in La Seine, but at least when you are sort of landlocked in a city that has no sea, no borders with the sea, it can help you psychologically to get through the summer a little bit. On that note, did you know that you can actually swim now on one of Paris's canals? So in 2017, they treated the water in an area near the Canal Saint-Martin, and they actually made it swimmable. Like I personally, because they also release a report every year of what comes out and what they lift out of the rivers and canals in Paris, and it is nasty. So I never felt brave enough to actually go swimming in that water, even though they said it was treated. But anyway, but you can technically swim in Paris as well. And you never see that either in TV or film. Another thing that I don't think is represented well enough is the walking you do in Paris. Most French people, Parisians, people living in Paris walk everywhere. It's actually quite a small city, so compared to a giant monster city like London, it's only 12 kilometers across end to end. And so most people walk everywhere. Like for example, if it's only a few kilometers away, most people would just consider walking that distance. And so contrary to what you see in TV and film, women aren't wearing stilettos and high heels. They're wearing sneakers. They're wearing like Adidas white sneakers and stuff getting around because you walk everywhere. Something that I'm not sure is depicted quite enough is the fact that you can just linger in Paris. Obviously you don't want to spend like an entire film just showing someone hanging out at a cafe, but I think that's something really special about the city, is that you can order like a €1 coffee and sit for hours and hours and hours, just people watching, chilling, reading, whatever. and there's going to be no sense of rush or urgency to move you on. And I think that's something really magical as well that could be displayed more often in media. Now, my last point is kind of cheating, but the thing I don't think that they show enough in TV and film about Paris is the outskirts of Paris. So just outside of Paris, you've got like Versailles, obviously that's probably shown the most. But outside of that, you have Fontainebleau, you have Le Château de Vaux-le-Vicomte, you have other beautiful, incredible places that you can visit that are really not far at all. Parc de Sceaux, for example, especially in the springtime, like there are incredible locations just on the perimeter of Paris, and I don't think that they get celebrated, explored, discovered enough via TV or film either. If you have ever visited or lived in Paris, tell me, what's something about the city that you love that you just don't think comes across in these cliche representations of the city via film and TV? I would love to hear all about it in the comments down below. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe for fresh Francophile content weekly and some insight into the New Zealand culture as well. Otherwise, I will see you next week on the Not Even French channel. A bientôt!